The Bears advance to the Atlantic Division Finals in the Calder Cup playoffs.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holmig. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about some of the moves that we saw Brian Maclellan make this last season, talking about signing Dylan Strome to a deal, talking about signing Rasmus Sandin and Sonny Milano, how I see him making similar moves this offseason. Then later in the show, we will talk about the progression of Hendrix Lapierre. It's been more of a bumpy ride than it has been for Connor McMichael, but he is still showing promise. But just to get it going here, we're talking about Connor McMichael and Aliaksei Protas and how they helped the Hershey Bears in their push for the Calder Cup. The Bears, Connor McMichael and Protas, they helped the Bears to the division finals. This is what I'm talking about here. This young and up-and-coming Hershey Bears team, a lot of these players ostensibly will be future Capitals, and it's going to be Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre, Vinny Iorio, Beck Mallenstein, Hunter Shepard, and Zach Fucale. Oh my, they're really kind of starting to come together here, aren't they? And, one of the things that brings me a lot of joy is that the Capitals did not get the season that they were looking for. Of course, they didn't even make it to the playoffs, period. I didn't see that coming in the beginning of the season. I thought, I hope this team makes a great push, into the further rounds, at least past the first round. As we know, they haven't made it past the first round since 2018 when they won the Stanley Cup, but that didn't even happen. So you're starting to see a lot of change. So I was a little bit bummed about the season, suffices to say. But what brings me joy is to see what some of the young Capitals players down in Hershey are doing, just really all gelling together and helping this team make a push in the Calder Cup playoffs. They are no stranger to playing in the Calder Cup playoffs or winning Calder Cups, but it is exciting for me, and you're starting to see some of the young players, most notably Connor McMichael, who is showing maturity beyond his years. I think really kind of, showing to everyone, including the Caps and GM and everyone saying, hey, next year is going to be my year. Just showing maturity and a great goal scoring touch as well. Connor McMichael scored in each of their first two games, and Aliaksei Protas found the net twice in the decisive Game 4 as the Hershey Bears knocked off the Charlotte Checkers with a 6-2 victory Thursday to advance to the Atlantic Division Finals in the Calder Cup, writes NBC Sports Washington. Boom. So much excitement for me, for the Bears. I followed this team for quite some time. And to see and to know that, a lot of these players are going to be ready at just about the time that Alex Ovechkin is ready to hang up the skates. So it is all aligning just perfectly. The stars are aligning perfectly. If you think about it, I know some will be ready earlier than that. See Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre, but then there's some young talent and draft picks, whoever those might be at the draft this summer that, potentially could be ready, about the time that Alex Ovechkin decides to hang up the skates. So to see this group gelling is so exciting for me in general. The Capitals AHL affiliate earned a first-round bye following a 97-point regular season that saw them finish second in the Atlantic. The third-seeded Checkers hosted the first two games of the series, but the Bears showed up no signs of rust by jumping out to a dominant 2-0 lead after narrowly dropping Game 3. Hershey rebounded with a resounding effort to clinch the series. excitement. This team showed domination through this entire series. I know they lost that game in there, and I'm like, oh, is the wheel starting to fall off here? Not the case at all. They put their foot down and ended up picking up the big dub. We always talked about our depth throughout the year. Head coach Todd Nelson said at practice Tuesday ahead of game 3, this is the first time all year where we've had everybody that's capable of playing on a roster healthy, and I don't think there was a stretch all season long where we were like this. That's what I'm talking about. This team coming together. Aliaksei Protas, who was eligible to play down in Hershey. We know what Aliaksei Protas had in the tank. He played so great in the preseason. He found his spot on the regular roster on the Capitals, the big team. It was a little bit hit or miss throughout the season. He was a healthy scratch sometime and plugged in all over the place. Anyway, he is helping that Hershey Bears team really propel it to great things. 16 different players recorded at least 1 point in the series, led by right wing Sam Annis, who finished with 2 goals and 4 assists. Protas, who joined the Bears after the Caps season ended in April, paced all skaters with a +5 rating as he stuffed the stat sheet with 5 points, including a power play goal. McMichael carried over his strong play to score key goals in both victories. Connor McMichael, the lightning rod. Every time I bring him up on this podcast, people have a strong opinion about Connor McMichael. 9 times out of 10, it's positive. Everyone's saying that next year has got to be the season for Connor McMichael. I hear you. His performance is speaking louder than words. I do feel like next year is going to be the year for Connor McMichael on the Caps. The big question is, of course, where does he fit in? Who comes out? Is it Strome that comes out? Is it Backstrom? Is it Kuzi? Is it Dowd? Where does he fit in? As long as they can figure that out, I think that he will have a spot on the big team next year. I don't want to see him on the 4th line, and I don't want to see him on the wing. I want to see him at the position that he excels at the most, the center position. And just based on his play down in the Calder Cup playoffs right now, I think he is cementing his spot on the big team next year. We'll just have to see how it all shakes out. It's not only that, though. Hunter Shepard and Zach Fucale continue to be lights out down in Hershey. Some people said, why did they sign Charlie Lindgren when they have such great goaltending down in Hershey? Most notably, Hunter Shepard, one of the best in all of the AHL. There's some chatter out there, amongst the talking heads, beat writers and bloggers out there that saying potentially they could deal Charlie Lindgren, almost expendable to a certain extent if you have someone like Hunter Shepard that seems like a simple plug and play. And I know that he didn't get any, he was called up last season, as we remember. He didn't get any game time action, but if what he can do down in Hershey is any indication of what he could do for the Capitals, I am excited about it. And you as Caps fans should be excited about it in the future. Zach, the interesting position, I will say, a caveat, if you will, is that both Hunter Shepard and Zach Fucale are both unrestricted free agents. I've heard from a lot of different people on Twitter saying that Zach Fucale is going over to Russia to play over there for a while. I don't know if that's true. I'm just telling you all the chatter that I've heard, and that most likely that Hunter Shepard will be the one that gets the new deal. As you know, there's a lot of other talent down. There's Clay Stevenson, Garen Bjorklund, and Mitchell, and all that kind of thing. So there is a stockpile, a plenty of goaltenders for the Capitals, but Hunter Shepard, for me, seems like the kind of guy that could potentially be that next, at least backup goalie. We know that we got Darcy Kemper, and crazier things could happen. Could they deal Darcy Kemper? Highly unlikely, but stranger things have happened. Say they get such a sweet offer, they get like this really great forward or great defenseman that we've all heard that this Capitals team needs. Anything is possible, is what I'm saying, but highly unlikely. But it is a good thing for me to see that they do have great options down in Hershey right now. Zach Fucale and Hunter Shepard. Positivity exudes on this team. All right, so after the break here, we are going to talk about the play of Hendrix Lapierre. It has been a bit more of a bumpy road than it has been for Connor McMichael, but he is still showing promise. We'll talk about Hendrix Lapierre coming up. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. We streamline hiring with powerful tools that find your match candidates. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed US data. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and follow or subscribe to Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts and YouTube. I have many great guests lined up for you this summer. I already had Mike Vogel on the show. I have John Walton coming up. I also have the new beat writer for Washington Hockey Now. So make sure and subscribe to Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Hendrix Lapierre and how he is progressing down in Hershey. Again, it's been a bit more of a bumpy road than it has been for Connor McMichael. Oftentimes, those two players are lumped together in the same sentence or paragraph, but I do think that he is trending in the right direction. Lapierre, 21, has hit his stride at just the right time, regarding 8 points over his last 10 games, including the 2 he tallied in Game 1. It's a groove he spent nearly the entire 22-23 campaign, his first full season at the pro level, trying to find rights, NBC Sports Washington here. So taking a look at it, I've watched the Hershey Bears. I've heard of his struggles. I've heard how he was scratched for a while, and they told him to kind of watch the game from up on top and see what the players are doing right and see if you can learn from any of the things that you observe from watching up in the press box. And I think message sent, message received, that Hendrix Lapierre is now playing much better than he was earlier in the season. I feel like I've taken a big step, Lapierre said in a press conference following Bears practice Tuesday. I was scratched during the season. I think it was a February in Charlotte. That was kind of a wake-up call for me, because obviously you never want to be in the stands for the weekend, and I really focused on those 2 games. I was looking forward at what players do, what it takes, and I've been doing a lot of video with the coaches. And, another guy that is showing maturity beyond his years, just kind of understanding that, he wasn't playing quite the way that they needed him to play, but he didn't get defensive. He didn't say, I want to get traded out of here. I want to get sent over to Sweden or Russia, anything like that. You see that happen certain times when, these guys come in with big egos, even in the AHL, and they don't, catapult right up to their big team, whatever they might be in the NHL, and they kind of pitch a fit and they say, I want out of here. And not the case with Hendrix Lapierre. He is taking the right approach, I believe, in all of this. And I think that, again, he's trending in the right direction. Head coach Todd Nelson scratched Lapierre for 2 games, February 18th and 19th, after the young center had gone 10 straight games without a goal. He returned from the long weekend off, determined to get back on the score sheet, but he suffered an upper body injury in the second game back that forced him out of the lineup for nearly 3 weeks. But now we know that's all in the rearview mirror. We know what he's doing now. Obviously, it's his first pro year, and I think he's handled it really well. Teammate and fellow Capitals first-round pick Connor McMichael said it's a tough transition going from junior to pro, and I think he's had a great year. He's for sure been picking up the pace, and he's played, and we need him now. So he's really a good player, and I really like playing with him. And I think those two, it's not coincidence that they get linked together. And when you hear beat writers and people talk about it, I think that the 2 guys are friends. And I think to a certain extent, they're kind of on the same trajectory. I think that, we both see them on this Caps team at some point. Obviously, I see Connor McMichael before Hendrix Lapierre, but still, I do see it happening sooner than later. And when I say that, I mean it still might be a year or two, but I think it is coming soon. If you look at where my game was to start the year, just in terms of not necessarily skills and all that stuff, but really the small details away from the puck and the intensity and stuff, I think it's gotten better. Lapierre said, I feel like I understand a little more how you want to play to have success. Just got to be consistent every game and bring it. And that's what I'm trying to do. So definitely took a big step, this team, in terms of maturity. Yeah, just understanding how the game works. Literally, that's the best way you can put it. And he is helping that Hershey Bears team. And I think that, if he continues to excel at that level, I think that, the sky's the limit as far as his potential. I really would like to see both of those players land on the Capitals big team at some point. I've heard rumblings, this last trade deadline where they were talking about potentially moving one of them. I don't think that's the right idea. Most notably, it was linked to Chikrin before he got moved out of Arizona there. So it is going to be interesting. I think to a certain extent, we've got to be patient, but that's okay. We've been promised not a whole lot of big change while Alex Ovechkin is here. So I'm going to say within the next year or two, both of those players should definitely be ready for the big time. All right. So after the break here, we will talk about Brian Maclellan and what kind of moves will he most likely make. I would say that he's probably going to make moves kind of like the Dylan Strome move, kind of like the Dylan Strome or Sonny Milano thing. We'll talk about that when Locked On Capitals continues. Looking for a delicious snack but don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar ever built. You got to try this. If you're like me and you want to make a healthier snack choice, but you don't want to compromise on taste, I've got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Bar Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and tasty, and they taste amazing. Seriously, they taste so amazing you won't think they're good for you. You got to try this. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate and dark chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And I've spoke to you for the longest time about how you can get these at built.com, but now you can get them at your nearest Walmart. That's right, head to the nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs, or if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter puff and churro. You can thank me later. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Listen, we know that there is going to be a lot of change this offseason. We know we have the draft lottery coming up, which I have you guys covered on, the draft itself, and then also free agency. I do expect that GM Brian Maclellan will be very busy, but what kind of moves is he going to make? Is he going to sign a big name like a DeBrincat? Is he going to come here? Is he going to go after Kane? Is he going to go after some of these big names, these rentals that were out there? I don't know if that's necessarily the case. If it's me, I think he's going to make more moves of players that aren't guys that are in the limelight, perhaps, but maybe guys that are on the verge of bigger things. See Dylan Strome. He was discarded by the Chicago Blackhawks, but Brian Maclellan saw something in him. He was ostensibly signed to fill in the role of Nick Backstrom, and that is, in fact, what he did do. But then he played so well that oftentimes he was the top line center. See moves like that, or Rasmus Sandin or Sonny Milano, those kind of things. I wouldn't expect any of the huge things that, you hear speculated on. The Washington Caps plan to try and compete for a Stanley Cup as long as Ovi is on the roster while he chases Gretzky's all-time goal record. Ovechkin still has 3 years remaining on his contract and is 72 goals behind Gretzky. One of the things he said is we want to finish out a couple of careers of important players in our organization, and we want to stay competitive, but we also want to get younger, Max said. So it's a challenge to be in a position to have all three of those things, but we're going to try writes NBC Sports Washington here. As Maclellan tries to reshape the Caps roster, there are two moves from the past season that show examples of his vision. The first occurred last July when the Caps added Dylan Strome on a one-year deal after he was non-tendered by the rebuilding Chicago Blackhawks. That seems to have dated like a carton of milk for the Blackhawks. You got to think to a certain extent they are kicking themselves over that. Strome, who originally signed a one-year $3.5 million deal, rewarded the Caps with a career high in goals, 23, 42, and 65. His strong play earned him a 5-year extension with the team in March, a deal that showed the organization's belief in him from both as a top contributor in the present and for the future. So 23 goals, 42 assists, and 65 points, a career high. And it happened kind of as, a long shot. I know that the Dylan Strome was a name that I've heard around the league for some time, not necessarily one of the marquee names that pops out at you, but I think that, he played so well, kind of a prove me deal, if you will. He proved himself to Mac and the Capitals that I belong here. That's why he got extended to that longer deal. I got to play with some really good players this year, and I'm looking forward to building on those and the chemistry and those relationships, Strome said. From a personal standpoint, I'm excited to come back next year. I'm excited to be here for the future. This is the kind of first time that I've had the opportunity to know where I'm going to be for a while. I'm excited to rebuild on what I did and get better. Kind of the same thing goes for me as Sonny Milano, a guy that if you remember was released from a PTO from the Calgary Flames and came here and really helped contribute to this team. At first, it kind of wavered a little bit in his time here, but ultimately I'm excited about that deal as well. Excitement about his and what potentially he's going to have next year. Also, Rasmus Sandin. What do we remember about Rasmus Sandin? Is he was the player that we got from the Toronto Maple Leafs, a guy that never really found his place on the Maple Leafs. I think that he saw himself in more of a top pairing, but he was often relegated to the third pairing there. But I think that, he played well. All things considered, helped out offensively, kind of had some questionable moves defensively on the Caps, in his short time here. But I think that those are things that can be addressed. He's still a young guy. So I think that he still has plenty of room for growth. I know he does. But taking a look at him, acquiring a player like Sandin, young and talented, but still have plenty of room for development. It's a blueprint Mac hopes to replicate moving forward. That's the ideal stuff for us to find good young guys that have potential to grow their game, Mac said. So that is ultimately the kind of moves that I see Mac going out and making. Again, I guess anything's possible, but I don't see him going out and picking up one of those marquee names. The biggest reason why is some of the biggest names on the cap, Ovi, Backstrom, Oshie, those kind of guys, they're already eating up a lot of that cap space. So unless they plan on moving out a bigger name to get a big name, then they're not going to have that cap space that's going to allow for that. So say they were able to get Kuznetsov's contract off the books by trading him out of here. I know there might be some kind of salary retention or something like that, but that is what I see happening is just these, what I'm going to say in quotes, smaller deals. The addition of Strome and Sandin this past season were hardly Mac's only attempts at building a strong roster on the Caps. Washington signed forward Connor Brown in free agency with hopes he'd emerge as a top 6 forward, but a torn ACL ended his season in just 4 games in. The additions of Marcus Johansson, who got a big deal out in Minnesota, and good for Marcus, and Henrik Borgstrom and defenseman Eric Gustafsson and Matt Irwin were meant to provide more depth. So taking a look at it, I guess it's going to remain to be seen after the playoffs and the Stanley Cup are done, what big names are available for the Caps to choose from. I think to a certain extent, they're kind of waiting. Of course, there's free agency in July. So a lot of these big moves aren't going to happen until, the latter part of the summer. It might not be until July or August, that kind of thing, or maybe right up until the beginning of the season. But I do see big movement happening with Mac. Again, comparables to kind of what we saw last season. One of the things that McLellan said is he wants to address the top 6. And when asked to pinpoint the center of the wing, he said, all of it. So I think that kind of anything is open, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of summer Nick Backstrom has. Kind of a bit of an interesting thing when I heard Mac talk. He said that, it's kind of up to him about his career. I think that we did see a bit of a dip in production when he came back, albeit that, Nick Backstrom came back way sooner than anyone thought. He is still not the Nick Backstrom that we remember. The hard part about it, however, is that he's diminished goods. I mean, every other team is going to know that he had a hip resurfacing procedure done, and he's not quite the same player. Same goes for TJ Oshie, who, let's face it, is a bit injury prone. We need to eventually, at some point, plug and play these players with younger and newer versions of that. Not rookies per se, but, guys that, maybe have, a little bit more fuel in the tank, if you will. It's still my belief, and I've said this a lot, that I think that Nick Backstrom is on the back nine of his career. And, I guess it remains to be seen, what kind of condition he's going to be in the fall. I would love for him to come back and say, hey, I'm ready to go. I'm good to go. And I think that I'm trending in the right direction. I just don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case. Same kind of goes for TJ Oshie and that kind of thing. I think that you're going to see one of the bigger players move this summer. Kind of the knee-jerk reaction is going to be Kuznetsov or Anthony Mantha, but it could potentially even be a bigger name than that. It's going to be something to watch for sure, and that is why you need to subscribe to Locked On Capitals. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. I love talking to you guys on this podcast about hockey, but I would love to talk to you about Capitals hockey even beyond this podcast. Come and join me on Subtext. I have the information scrolling on the bottom of the screen if you're on YouTube. If you're not on YouTube and listening on the audio side, first of all, thank you. And I will have that information for you in the show description. So come and join me on Subtext. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And are you one of the everydayers? Do you listen to this podcast every day? I would love to hear from you. Message me on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Caps and say, hey, Dan, I'm an everydayer of Locked On Capitals. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll give you a special shout out on Friday's show. All right, my name is Dan Holme of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day, and I'll talk to you again next time.